explained, like Ibn al-Qayyim, it is said it is the light of the revelation which falls upon the uncorrupted heart, meaning the uncorrupted fitrah. The uncorrupted fitrah is enlightened, but yet that it is not enlightened to its fullest. So when the light of revelation comes upon it, it is complete because it can understand what it could not obtain by itself, so it becomes light upon light. So that's the second characteristic, that it agrees with man's natural disposition, which Allah has endowed him with, or al-fitrah, and sound reasoning, which is known in Arabic as al-aql al-sahih. The third characteristic is that this Sunni Muslim creed, this Aqeedah Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah, is one of clarity and straightforwardness. In other words, if you ever read, or if some of you who are originally Christians, and ever tried to understand the beliefs of whether religions outside of Islam or the beliefs of those sects which have strayed with the Sunnah, you find it very complex, very difficult to understand. Even the scholars, those who come out to preach those doctrines, they can't explain it. And that is, of course, because it is not based in revelation, it's not rooted in revelation. It might be partially rooted in revelation, but it has some falsehood in it. And so therefore it's very complex. And that's why you can never find the Christians able to explain the issue of Trinity. No matter how much they try, throughout the centuries now, almost they've come over now 2,000 years in their history, they still cannot explain the Trinity. Each Christian church, each Christian theologian explains it in a way different from the other. And that is why they've just said it's a matter of faith. You just have to accept it or not. Because it is not, it is filled with contradiction. And likewise, the beliefs of the stray sects in Islam. As far as the Sunni creed, the correct belief of Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah is one which is straightforward and clear. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, had it been from other than Allah, meaning the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would have found much difference and contradiction therein. We also find this last principle, just to explain it a little bit further, we find that it has an effect on the way these people are. That's why we find the scholars who were originally rooted in beliefs which are heretical or beliefs outside the Sunnah changing their lives. They go through changes. Here is Imam al-Ash'ari. In the earliest part of his life, he was a Mu'tazili, which is one of the sects, a stray sects. And then in the second part of his life, he had a mixture of beliefs. And finally, in his third part of his life, he came to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And likewise, you find other scholars, just like Imam al-Ash'ari, you find al-Baqilani, who also in the end part of his life went through changes and came to finally the belief of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And also al-Juwayni, and his son Imam al-Haramain, and also Imam al-Ghazali, Abu Hamid, who died in the year 505, and the Shihrastani and Imam al-Razi, and so forth. All of these men, who were great scholars at one time of these deviant creeds, in the end of their life, because of the contradiction in these deviant creeds, they had to and change and differences and so forth. So those are quickly 7 characteristics. Okay. The next point we want to come to, which is unfortunately we only have 15 minutes and it's the main part of the lecture, that the methodology which was employed by Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah in acquiring and deriving the issues of belief. And this, to me, was the most important issue of this lecture. We should know first and foremost that I have about 12 principles here which I like to relate to you. That these principles, even if we were to spend a whole lecture on just single one of these principles, we still couldn't explain it in its fullest detail. And that even if we were to spend a whole conference on one of these principles, we still couldn't explain it to its fullest detail. Because for example, one of these principles, Ibn Taymiyyah explained in a book which was recently published and edited in 10 volumes. I mean, covering at least 6,000 pages. Just one of these principles. So I'm going to go through them sort of quickly, but just the idea is just to familiarize ourselves with these principles and hopefully ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and maybe in the question and answer session or in a future time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the opportunity that we can discuss some of these principles in more detail. But basically we can say that there are 12 principles which form the foundation of the methodology which is employed by Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the Orthodox Sunni Muslims, the Salafi Muslims, in deriving and understanding the specific issues of belief. You see, often we spend time understanding, which is required to understand just the articles of belief. Like we believe, for instance, because we are Sunni Muslims, that in the Day of Judgment there is a bridge over the hellfire. And we believe that this bridge over the hellfire has certain characteristics. That, as the Prophet ﷺ described, it is as thin as a hair strand. And yet at the same time, it is as sharp as a sword's edge. And that mankind will pass over it according to the measure of their actions. Some will quickly pass over it, like the blinking of an eye. And some will go slower and slower until there are even some people who will crawl over it. And some people will fall off this bridge into hellfire, or will be snatched by a certain thing which has thorns, like a certain tree which has thorns, and will be taken to the hellfire. This is a belief we have, and this is important. But what sometimes we fail to do is to understand that methodology, or that manhaj, which we need in order to understand how do we derive these beliefs. Because the Quran and the Sunnah has come with both. It has come with the actual specific beliefs, and it has come with the methodology which we need to use to understand how these beliefs were derived, and how to refute and affirm, refute the beliefs of others, and also affirm these beliefs in and of themselves. So I have in front of me a summary of this methodology in 12 principles, which I'd like to quickly relate. The first principle is something which I've alluded to earlier, that the source of this belief in itself, this Orthodox or this Sunni Muslim creed, is restricted solely to the Book of Allah, Al-Quran, the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and the confirmed consensus of the Salaf, the first three generations of Islam. And the reason why I say confirmed consensus, because sometimes things are related as a consensus upon them, but in actuality, in the report of the consensus, there's not really a consensus. So the confirmed consensus and the authentic Sunnah. That's principle one. Principle two, that it is required for us to accept everything which has been authenticated and affirmed and confirmed from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Whether that has come to us by way of what is known as al-Mutawatir, which means a report which has been reported, which has been related in such a large number throughout all the stages of narration that it's impossible for a lie to be conceived, that this report is based in a lie or an error, a misunderstanding. Or this mode of transmission of this authentic Sunnah is what is known as ahad. And sometimes people, ahad, they understand it means the report of a single narrator. And that's wrong. Ahad means whatever is non-mutawatir. Whatever is non-mutawatir. And as I've just explained to you, that the mutawatir narration is whatever has been reported by such a large number throughout all its stages of transmission that it's impossible for it to have been rooted in either a lie or a misunderstanding or a misquote or something of that matter. And if you want to know about that this ahad hadith is approved, because many sects reject a lot of matters of the ahad hadith, I would like to refer you just to two books which you'll find in the English language. One book which has been reprinted here in England, is Imam Shafi'i's Al-Risala, which was originally translated and printed in the United States in Johns Hopkins University. It's translated by a Christian Iraqi, and is been reprinted by a place in Cambridge, Islamic Text Society. This book has a whole chapter by Imam Shafi'i affirming the ahad hadith. This is one book which you can use, and translation is not bad. The second thing is look in volume 9 of Sahih al-Bukhari. Before you have a book which is said a book of ahad traditions, where Imam Bukhari affirms from the Sunnah, from the Quran, that the ahad hadith must be accepted. And then he has a book of holding on to the book and the Sunnah, and found in the book of Tawheed. So this is something, these are two sources which you can refer to if you come across this argument that we don't accept the ahad hadith in matters of aqidah. Something, because we don't have enough time to discuss it right now. The third thing is that, okay, we said that that we have our creed is founded in the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Messenger, and that we accept the Sunnah of the Messenger whether it's mutawatir or ahad. non-mutawatir. But how do we understand the book of the Sunnah? Well, that brings us to the third principle. And that is, we understand it, there's three points. First of all, the unequivocal texts which are in the Quran and the Sunnah. There are certain ayahs, certain verses of the Quran, and certain narrations of the Prophet ﷺ, certain ahadith, which are unequivocal. They cannot have a second meaning to it. It's clear cut. These in themselves are a proof of the matters of belief. The second level is, or the second grade in our methodology, or the second stage, is the understanding of the Salaf themselves. The Salaf explained certain verses, certain ahadith, or they understood certain things from these verses and ahadith. And likewise, those scholars which have traveled upon their methodology throughout the centuries, even though they might not be specifically